Brewster here in the episode of Chordplay, and this is the Chords of King Crimson. And I've had some requests to feature some of King Crimson's music, and we're going to be talking about Robert Fripp. And King Crimson formed in London, England in 1968, and went on to become one of the early, prog rock bands that helped usher in, what was known as proto-prog. That includes, Pink Floyd, Genesis, Yes, and of course King Crimson. And there's some other bands too. But they really did help popularize, this form of music that eventually became known as progressive rock. And I'm a huge prog rock nerd, so I love all the bands I just mentioned, Floyd, Yes, and Genesis, but I also love King Crimson. And there's some really eye-opening and different ideas in this lesson. So here we go. In a lot of ways, Robert Fripp is a very misunderstood musician. And I think a lot of rock and blues-based musicians look to him and they listen to his music and they scratch their head. And it's very different. He doesn't have a blues-based, background in music. His influences come from avant-garde jazz and classical. You can hear it and you can see it, definitely when he performs and stuff too. And he's, aside from being very experimental and avant-garde, he's also very prolific, and he actually appears on over 700 recordings, which is unbelievable. He's definitely a pioneering guitarist and musician, and aside from developing what's known as new standard tuning, which is, tuning the strings of the guitar in fifths. And I think the tuning there, I think it's actually C, G, D, and then A, and then E, and then I think the high E string is a G, but they're all tuned in fifths, which is really unusual. And then also the very famous, Frippatronics, delay looping kind of tape echo effect that he developed. I mean, that was a long time ago. And it definitely revolutionized the way, musicians performed, because he was able to basically loop and layer with himself, almost like what you would find, musicians using loopers today. I mean, I use a ditto looper in lessons quite frequently on this channel. And in some ways, the early Frippatronics was kind of like an early looper. You could call King Crimson's music different. That's a word you could use to describe their music. You could also use words like strange and odd and unusual, but then you could also use words like creative and pioneering and interesting and also revolutionary, of course, too. And their music and the composition of the band and everything, the way they layer parts together and instruments working together and stuff, it's very interesting, very unusual, very different. There are all these rhythmic oscillations and hemiola and all this stuff happening where different rhythms and time signatures and stuff like that happen. But here's an image with some of the things that you might find, like some of the compositional techniques that King Crimson uses, and that definitely gives their music that really different kind of on the edge sound. The music in this episode is going to come from an assortment of different King Crimson albums, and I initially was going to do like early stuff, and then when I started to revisit their music and listen to it, I thought, no, I want to include as much as I can, so there's only so much I can do in one episode, and they have so much great music too. So I'm really just searching for chords and progressions, and unusual, chord play, basically. So here we go. All right, with the opening, that's 21st Century Schizoid Man, and that's from the In the Court of the Crimson King album, a classic, King Crimson album. And I got something like this. There, you're basically, and I've seen this written a couple different ways, and there are very few transcriptions for King Crimson, music and albums out there. I found, very little to go off of. So I actually had to use my ear. I also found some live footage, to kind of watch, Fripp and Adrian Belew and some of the players in the band play. But this is what I came up with, and I kind of just did it all in one position. And I've seen this written with power chords, like, or something like that, and that just does not sound right to me at all, like that. That doesn't sound like it. To me, I hear it like this. And like on that last chord, it's actually moving, from C power chord, and then these fourths right there. And right kinda you're ending on C minor, a little partial. So right there. And then you're climbing up F5, F sharp 5 to G5. This crying, you know, and I've seen it written with just single notes, but I like doing unison bends right there to kind of fill it up a little bit more. And you're just mimicking what we did with power chords, but you're doing unison bends right there. And then do that riff again. And it's really interesting, a powerful riff, and it's very early. That's the late 60s, you have to think. And also when the verse starts, you have that crushing, you know, C minor 7 right there. Very unusual song, and just very demanding on the ears, too. Up next is Moonchild, and this is also from In the Chord of the Crimson King album, and it's this really mellow chord progression like this. A minor, and you're really just playing the root note, then the D string, and then the two notes you're holding there on the G and the B, and then A minor 7 right there. Just move that A down to a G, and then move that G to F sharp, and now it's A minor 6, and then move that F sharp down to an F, and now you're playing F sharp major over G sharp right there. And I like that little twist on that last chord. Okay, up next is Book of Saturday, and this is from the Lark's Tongue and Aspic album, and it's this really unusual higher position idea, and he's mixing, you know, fretted notes with harmonics, which I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff, like this. Starting with this E and A harmonic, and then it's a partial, you know, A minor chord, but it's way up there, and you're moving that partial A minor to this partial G right there, that G note and B, and then you're going to play the open D, and then a D minor 9 right there, just add that E note, and then take the E note off and just play D minor, and then grab a 12th fret harmonica on the G and the B strings, and then do the beginning again. Next up, I'm going to try to emulate, or at least simulate, that oscillating rhythmic thing that you hear King Crimson do in their music. And you can definitely hear this in the time period when Adrian Belew, you know, was working with Robert Fripp, because they both, like, they seem to love, you know, bouncing these ideas off each other. So this is Discipline from the album Discipline, and there's two guitar parts. And I'm also going to use the TC Electronic Ditto looper to kind of capture both guitars so you can hear this properly. So the first guitar, I believe this is actually Robert Fripp. And this is in 5/8, so you're just counting to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's kind of like an A minor 11, kind of, you know, implied. It's all single notes, but he's grabbing, you know, C to D, and then that A to C to E. It's all single notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's Robert's part. And then basically actually, Adrian is playing the same series of notes, but in a different order. So he's starting on A. So when you put that together, it sounds really cool. So I have Robert's part on the looper. The TC Electronic did a looper. So here's Robert, and I'm going to play Adrian's part with it, and you'll hear that rhythmic kind of weird oscillation thing. Hear things like that from bands like Tool. Definitely Tool's a big King Crimson fan. You know, Dream Theater, you know, a lot of prog rock bands, you know, kind of do that weird, kind of oscillating, strange, rhythmic, you know, melodic thing. All right, next up is Lament, and this is from the album Starless and Bible Black, and it's this really kind of understated chord part, and I saw some transcriptions online that were really out there. I don't think they were right, and I came up with something like this. I'm also strumming this just with my thumb, because you really don't hear a pick, you know, strumming these chords. It's really soft, like this. Starts over again. This song, honestly, the vocal performance reminds me of Queensryche. It sounds like Jeff Tate a little bit. So there's definitely maybe a a King Crimson influence in Queensryche's music, because it totally sounds like Queensryche to me. But we got this. So it's basically F sharp major 7 to F sharp 7 to F sharp 6 and then F sharp 7. So we're just changing that note on the D string right there. We're doing it like that. And that's actually a good workout right there, because you're using all of your fret hand fingers for that. And then move up to G sharp and do it again. G sharp major 7, G sharp 7, G sharp 6, G sharp 7. A half step and do it in A major 7, A7, A6, A7. And then move up to B major 7, B7, B6, B7. And then move back to A, A major 7, A7, and then G major 7, G7. It starts all over again right there. It's actually deceptively hard to play. It's demanding on the fret hand. You can definitely feel it like in your wrist and your forearm, because it's challenging. You know, it looks easy, but that's actually kind of secretly hard to play. Next up is the song Inner Garden 1, which it also happens to be Inner Garden 2, and that's from the album Thrack, one of my favorite King Crimson albums. And for some reason, Thrack seems to be overlooked, or it doesn't seem to get as much attention as some of their other albums. But definitely Thrack from the 90s is brilliant. And this is in drop D. And it has this really eerie, almost kind of Buckethead kind of flavor. But I think this is, what, 94, I think it was? But something like this. So D, and this first chord is really weird. So that's an E flat minor flat 6. You're just borrowing the first fret on the bottom 2 strings and the 4th fret on the D and the G, and just pick through it like that. So after the opening chord here, E flat minor flat 6, you're going to convert that to this, and it's actually the same chord, just a different fingering. Which I know this sounds weird, but it is the same chord. We're just kind of flipping, 2 of the notes in that chord in a different order. So you're going to pick through that like this. This is an implied D major 13. Very yummy chord right there. Love that. Then you want to repeat it again. So right there, it's like a little part of D6, and then that's like a little piece of F minor 6. And then you start doing this, so you're borrowing the 4th fret there on the low E and the A, and then you're holding the 6th fret on the D and the 7th fret on the G. And that's an implied F sharp sus2 flat 6. And then just move that D note back a half step and it just changes it to an F sharp sus2. And then right here at the end, this is really tasty. So right there, you're basically grabbing, this is F, there's a D, there's an A, so it's kind of like D minor implied, but then you're moving that down to that F sharp, which is really cool. So it's something like this. Last example is a short one. This is Peace, a Theme, and this comes from the album In the Wake of Poseidon, and it's on acoustic guitar, and it's really cool. Something like this. So it actually starts with this A minor 6 right here. Or I'm sorry, A6, not A minor 6, A6. And then you're doing this little hammer-on pull-off and a slide down to that C sharp, and then it's E major over G sharp right there. And then slide the C sharp to E and grab that F sharp. And then play D major 7 right there. And then you're going to slide E back to C sharp, and then just play A major. So right there, the first part is this. And then the second time, or the second half, you're going to start with D major 7 right here. Do the same hammer and pull off to that C sharp. And then right there, it's E over G sharp, and then play the low E open. And then you're playing an implied E6-9 right here. But you're going to have that low E ringing right there, like that. And then you're going to move back to a D6-9. And then a hammer-on pull-off right there, F sharp to A to F sharp. And then slide back to that E and end on D major 7. And you do it all over again, like this. Alright, that's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with the Chords of King Crimson, and I'm definitely a big fan of King Crimson and all progressive rock and metal groups, and I'm also a big fan of fusion, too, especially from the 70s, Return to Forever and Mahavishnu Orchestra and some of that stuff. Then you start moving over into people like Frank Zappa, And of course, the bands I mentioned earlier, Genesis, and Yes, of course, Rush and Kansas, and all these different groups. It's really exciting to hear music and, songs pushed to the max. Breaking out of these habits and 1-4-5 progressions and very standard, songwriting habits, taking that stuff and just throwing it out the window and really shaking things up, doing something different, writing 10 or 12-minute songs, or having music that has different movements, almost like a classical, symphonic orchestra or a symphony, but you're hearing it with a rock band, guitar, bass, drums, keyboards, and whatever. So it's really cool to kind of hear, rock music kind of borrowing, some of the compositional ideas from classical and jazz. And then you're just cramming all that stuff in there and creating something very different and unusual, something brand new, which, proto-prog eventually became progressive rock, and it was new at the time. Of course, now we've heard it, for decades, but something really special about the origin of where all this music came from. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know with more content and material. Thank you.